focused on the giver.
Okay.
Because I know that this is my route into the Lois Lowry verse, and so in finding the giver, I stayed on that and really dug deep into it, and dug deep into who you were in that aspect, that little, if I were doing, like if we were doing, let's say, Michelangelo, we could just study just one of his pieces,
Yeah.
and talk about that, even though I know that he has a great genre. So that's where we're doing right now. So I'm meeting you through this.
Okay. And you're far ahead of me because I haven't reread that book in quite a long time, and you're the expert now.
Great. Oh, this will be fun. I want to start, one of the places where I want to start, Lois, is that little girl in 1948 in Japan. That really struck me when I read the extras in The Giver, and it was you talking about that time. So could you describe her? Could you describe her and talk about that little girl in 1948 in post-war Japan?
Okay. 1948 makes that child, me, 11 years old. My father was a career Army officer. I'm just going to go back and give a little history there, because my father was actually the son of Norwegian immigrants in Wisconsin, of course. And his father died when he was young, so he was responsible for supporting the family from the time he was in high school. And he went to college on a scholarship, and he went through dental school. And then he got out of dental school, Marquette University, in, I don't know, say 1931, at the height of the Depression. And he said nobody could pay to go to a dentist, and he couldn't make a living. And the Army at that time had a spot for one dentist. The Army needed one dentist, and a lot of guys, and I say guys because at the time there were not women dentists. There are now,
No.
of course. A lot of guys took the exam, and my father got the spot. He had no wish to be a military guy. He had a wish to support his family and eventually his wife and children. But he remained in the Army for his entire career. Okay, so by 1948, he's gone through World War II, mostly on a hospital ship, treating facial and jaw injuries. And then the war ends, and he enters Japan, and his job is to set up dental services for the American occupation forces in Japan.
Yeah.
And after a while, we're back in Pennsylvania where our grandparents live.
All right, but before I do that, one of the things that struck me was that little girl, that 11-year-old girl who goes away from her parents to go to the Japanese, to go into the Japanese economy and to stand there.
Yeah.
This is only 3 years after that we have dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and after that, and I want to see the world through her eyes.
Okay, and that's where I'm getting to. Japan at that time, as you point out, it's just 3 years after the war has ended. Tokyo was rubble. They quickly built houses for the incoming Americans, like my family. I'm the middle of 3 children. I have, at that point, an older sister who is, if I'm 11, she's 14, and my little brother, who's 5. Okay. Sister doesn't want to move from where she's just entering high school and has a boyfriend in Pennsylvania, so she's little brother doesn't care where he lives as long as he can take his toy trucks. And I was so excited, quietly excited about going to a foreign country, an adventure. I had been a prolific reader and had read stories of Japan, and but I was a great introvert, very shy child. So I didn't share my feelings enormously with my family. And they didn't know that I thought we were going to be wearing Japanese clothes, eating with chopsticks. Miraculously, I would speak Japanese right away. And it took me by surprise when, after a long voyage by boat from New York down through the Panama Canal, a month to get to Tokyo, actually to Yokohama, Dad picks us up in Yokohama and drives us to Tokyo, which is very nearby. And I'm looking out the car windows at this, as I described, rubble. People living in cardboard boxes. It was a devastated country. And then suddenly we arrive at this walled compound with little American style houses, and Dad says, this is where we're going to live. But he had whispered something to me on the way there. He said, I have a surprise for you. And what it was a bicycle. He had bought me a bicycle. And so we were not captive in that compound. I went by bus every day to an international school, but I could ride my bike wherever I wanted. And in those days, whatever country you lived in those days, parents weren't helicopters as they are now. I could go out on that bike in the morning and not come back till dinner time. And nobody ever said, where's Lois? Because they knew I was exploring. And I would go out through the gate. I would see, actually, I'm remembering now, I would see the lines of Japanese women lined up to show their ID to come in to work for the American families. We had 3 maids in our house, and they were young women who had lost everything, probably their fathers and their boyfriends or their husbands, fiancés, but they were wonderful women. At any rate, I would ride past them out into the community. The area where we lived, if you know Tokyo at all, was called Shibuya. And if you go to Tokyo now, and I've been there several times in recent years, Shibuya is a thriving, busy, noisy, popular, sophisticated area. But at the time, it was like everything else. It had been devastated by the war. But I used to ride my bike, and if anybody noticed, well, of course they noticed me. I was a blonde child in this alien community, but they were very kind. And the only intrusive thing, though I didn't think of it that way at the time, is every now and then a Japanese person would touch my hair, because blonde hair was still unusual to them.
Of course.
And gradually I picked up a little Japanese, but it wasn't that I was out there talking to people.
No.
I was just observing. I have always been a very observant person. I think most writers are. You have to be.
Absolutely.
And so those 3 years that I spent in that country, they just loom in my memory and imagination as a magical time. I loved my time in that country. I love going back, and I always want it to be the same way it was. And of course, things don't stay that way.
No. Had you picked up a pen at that time? Had you started little beginnings of the writing?
Some years back, I was speaking at, happened to be Brigham Young University, and I mentioned this, that my first published writing was when I was 10 years old, and I had written a letter to a children's magazine to which I subscribed. Someone gave me a subscription to Jack and Jill magazine every year.
Very well, yes.
And they had 2 pages in the middle. I don't want to call it the centerfold because that has connotations, but of letters from children. And I wrote letters to that magazine all the time. But it wasn't until I was 10, the summer I was 10, August. I remember that time of year because I was at summer camp. And my mother, these, of course, are pre-email days, pre-cell phone days. My mother wrote me a letter and said she had had a telephone call from Jack and Jill magazine that they were publishing my letter in the August issue, and she would send a copy to me. I was at camp for 2 months. And so I was very excited by that. At the same time, now I'm going into too much detail, but I was also very apprehensive because I had told a lie at summer camp. I mentioned that I was always a very observant child, but also very shy and introverted. I noticed at summer camp when I arrived, the counselors, this was a girls' camp, the people, the women, young women who took care of us, supervised us, were college girls. And I noticed when they asked about kids' families, they paid more attention to, and therefore I thought liked better, the little girls who had brothers in college. So I had a vivid imagination, and so I told them that I had a little brother, and I had a big sister, and I also had a brother who went to Princeton. I didn't know anything about colleges, but the name Princeton had been bandied about in my family because of an uncle, and so I just threw that in, and that got me a lot of popularity among the college girl counselors. However, I also remembered that the letter I wrote to Jack and Jill magazine, which my mother was going to send to me, said, I have one brother, Johnny, who is 4 years old, and a sister who is 13. And I knew I was going to be busted. However, my mother sent the magazine. And the reason I even mention this whole magazine letter story is because one thing that was true that I said in the letter was, I want to be a writer. I am writing a novel. It is called A Dog Named Lucky. I am on chapter 13. And that was true. I was always, in answer to your original question, writing a novel or a story or poems. I'm now remembering a whole other story has to do with my poetry. But at any rate, so that I mentioned that at Brigham Young University, and there was a energetic graduate student who went to, I don't know how he found it, but he sent me a copy of the magazine, which I hadn't seen for many years. And there was that letter. And I remember Mother sending it to me, and I looked inside to see my name in print, and then I hid it in the trunk under my bed, and no other child saw it. So I wasn't busted after all. I got away with, as we say, the big lie.
The big, yes, well, yes, and were our big lies that big? That would be wonderful. So, all right. So, did you companion poetry and prose at that young age?
It was the manipulation that has a bad
Words and concept, because so much of when I read your work slowly because I see that you craft your sentences.
And I guess I always did that even at age 10. The the reason I mention poetry is because I also, wrote poems at that time. I even hesitated to call it poetry in a grandiose way because it was
Exactly.
it was little rhyming couplets.
Sure.
My grandfather, with whom we lived during the war, had a gentleman friend who had never married. He was a very distinguished judge. His last name was Biddle, which is a very famous name in Pennsylvania. You would have no way of knowing that because you're in Texas. But at any rate, Judge Biddle was a good friend of my grandfather's. And Judge Biddle was a very literary man, a retired judge. And he took an interest in me because I had an interest, even as a child, in literature. And so one time, I used to sometimes, small town Pennsylvania, knock on his door. His manservant would come to the door and invite me in, and I would have a cup of tea with the judge. At any rate, one time I gave him a book of poems that I had written. It was actually, a little notebook that I had bought at the local stationery store, and each page had a very bad poem on it. And also, I'm ashamed to say, I had decorated with stickers. I was, probably 8 or 9 at the time. And many years later, I was a sophomore in college, majoring in writing, when I got a letter from a Philadelphia law firm telling me of the death of a man named Judge Edward McFadden Biddle III, and I had been mentioned in his will. And also, they had enclosed a package, which was my little book of poems that they had found in his desk. And he had left me, I may get this wrong, but I want to say 1/2 of 1% of his estate. He probably hoped that I would use it to further my literary studies in graduate school or something, but I was an adolescent, even though I was 19 at the time.
Of
And
course.
I bought a car, and I dropped out of college and drove with my boyfriend, who quickly became my husband. I was 19, he was 21.
Oh, with all the maturity and the foresight of a 19-year-old, absolutely. I'm going to drop out of college and buy a car and
I'm going to drive this Pontiac across the United States, and we're going to live in California. Any rate, so that's confessions of somebody who made a lot of stupid choices when she was young. But then we all did, didn't we?
that's a big part of being young, right?
Yes, yeah.
Then, all right. So, were you building your confidence as a writer? And so now we're getting into opportunities to be able to do that. So how did that happen? So you're in California and you're building. Did you have an Underwood portable? Did you, what was your
Okay.
Smith Corona? I love those mechanical typewriters. The little portables that we would carry around.
I mentioned the gift of a bicycle that my father gave me.
Exactly.
My
Which
third,
comes in.
yes, but on my 13th birthday, we're still in Japan. This was a monumental gift at the time. It wouldn't be now, when every kid, my grandchildren all got computers when they were 10. But this, my father gave me a portable typewriter in Tokyo for my 13th birthday. It was a Smith Corona. It's the same typewriter that I took to college, where I'd been given a scholarship to study writing, and I took that Smith Corona with me and used it for many years. So by the time I dropped out and took my Smith Corona in the Pontiac with my husband, new boy husband, and we settled in San Diego because he was an ensign in the Navy. He'd gone through college on a naval ROTC scholarship.
Right.
So we settle in San Diego. He immediately gets on a destroyer and heads to the Far East, and I'm alone with my typewriter in San Diego in a cheap apartment. $61.
Beautiful San Diego, magnificent. I lived there for a couple of years. I mean, it's an extraordinary place.
Yeah. So I thought, my husband's salary was very small, and I was a new bride, and I thought the thing to do would be to get a job. And there was an ad in the San Diego paper for somebody to work for the San Diego paper in the classified ads department. And I thought that was just the job for me. I mean, picture the high degree of literacy that I could bring to writing an ad for free kittens. And so I think I even went in for an interview, and I didn't get the job because I didn't have any qualifications. So although that was my dream still, to be a writer, it took me a long time to get around to doing it, because in addition to other circumstances, I had 4 children by the time I was 26. And then,
You gestated 4 human beings.
yes, yeah. And
We think of it. Here we are in our time in 2024, when reproductive rights are so much on the ballot, and we're really seeing that. And you gestate for how? I mean, that to me is an astonishing thing, that you actually made a human being.
it was not unusual at that time to have large numbers of children. I actually wanted to have 6. I don't know
Yeah,
why that seemed like a good goal at the time. But when my 4th child, born when I was 25, I guess, began kindergarten. So by now, I can't even tell you how old I would have been,
right.
say 30, 31. I went back to college. And it took me 4 years to complete the 2 that I hadn't done. And then I
Mhm.
went to graduate school. So, for all of those reasons, plus the growing children and the increasingly difficult marriage, because 2 children got married and then grew in other directions,
Exactly, as we do.
as we do. And so it took me a long time to get around to actually doing the writing that I had always aspired to.
Mhm. Then, all right, so that's what happens in that you get to the what I'm trying to find is the place where we go. Here we have the giver, where you begin, and the idea from it. And here we have you as a postgraduate writer in that. And that what that can you describe that space in
Very
between? Yeah,
famous.
that space in between to where the first inklings, because I want to know about the inklings of the idea of this story that I want to dig into with you
Yeah.
about the giver. So describe that liminal space.
Okay. Okay. And I'm trying to put it together in my head now, and it is fitting into place a little bit. When I said a minute ago that I still wanted to be a writer, had always wanted to be a writer, and when I was in graduate school, I guess, having gotten a degree now in English literature, in graduate school, I had. Uh, I had room to take some courses other than literature courses, and I studied photography, which appealed to me. I've always had a strong visual sense. And then I found that I could actually, sitting in my house in Maine where we lived, typing. By now I had upgraded to an electric typewriter.
Ooh.
It was still a typewriter, but you could plug it in. Um, I found that I could sell articles to magazines, and I could sell them more easily if I could do the photography that went with them. I set up a
Sure.
dark room. And so I was a photojournalist, I guess you would say, freelance. And I
Totally.
was doing a lot of that. And I could do it from home, although there was a magazine I worked for who would send me out on assignments. But by then the kids are, say, junior high age and middle school. And so I could take off for a day or two. But fiction was what I wanted to write and what I wrote on the side. And sometimes I sent stories to magazines. Fewer and fewer magazines published fiction by then. When I,
Exactly.
when I was a child, many magazines did. My mother
And
subscribed to them.
and they were pulp fiction. This is where that comes from, where Heinlein and so many of the science fiction
Yeah,
writers would write by the word, and they would do that. And this is how we
yeah,
support. I mean, this was a whole industry.
exactly. But by the time I was starting to do it, there were fewer and fewer magazines that
Hmm.
published fiction. Nonetheless, I would send my stories written while dinner was cooking and the kids were watching TV, and get the rejection letters. And then now I'm thinking back to what year this would have been, 1975.
Hmm.
I'm in my 30s still, I guess. I was born in 37. I'm not
Yep.
great at math. So let's say I'm 30 some years old.
Yeah.
And it was fall. We lived in Maine. And one morning, I'm in the kitchen, which is where I spent most of my time.
Hmm.
Husband has gone off with his briefcase to his law office because after the Navy, he'd gone to law school. Kids have gone off to school. The Newfoundland dog is asleep on the kitchen floor. And I scrape the kids' breakfast plates into the dog dish and take it out to the back porch. And the dog lumbers along to follow me to get his scraps. And I stopped because there was something about the air. This would have been November 1975, I think. And it brought back a memory. And as soon as I say the word memory, you can hear the giver starting to take shape, even though it doesn't happen for many years. Okay, the air in Maine in November combines, well, first of all, the kids dying pumpkins from Halloween, rotting pumpkins, dead apples from the apple trees out back, wood smoke from a neighbor's stove, the ocean, we live near the ocean, all of that combined. And it brought back a memory of a time that I was 8 or 9 years old. And I went in the house and I wrote on my electric typewriter, I wrote a letter to a friend, which is what we did in those days, no email. We wrote letters to our friends. And I had a friend who lived in Rhode Island. And I wrote to her frequently, and I just wrote about the memory that this set of smells had brought to me of a day that I spent with my father when I was 8 or 9 years old. The war had ended and he had come home. He had to go back to Japan, but he was home very briefly. And he was a stranger to me, and I was a stranger to him. And it was a story about how we connected on that one day in the fall of whatever year it had been. I wrote that to her. She wrote back to me immediately, and she said somebody would buy that story. So I reformatted it, wrote it more as a story, but it was still the true account. And I sent it to Red Book magazine, which I think still exists, but they no longer publish it.
Exactly. But that was a big magazine at that time.
Yeah. And they immediately wrote back and said they wanted to publish it, and they did. Okay. So as a matter of fact, I don't know what birthday it would have been of my father's, but I sent him $1 and a birthday card. And I said, your birthday present is at the drugstore. Buy Red Book magazine. And it was a story about him. At any rate, after that story was published, and it was a story for adults, but it was seen through the eyes of a child.
Of course.
I got a letter from the editor of Red Book magazine enclosing a letter that they had received. And they said, this enterprising editor wants to know how to find you. And it was from a book publisher. And it said, you sound like somebody who could be writing for young people. Would you consider writing a novel for what we call young adults? And it was so unusual to be asked to write something. They didn't promise to publish it, but there was going to be somebody at the other end. I wasn't going to be sending it into a vacuum to a stranger.
Who knows? Yes.
Yeah. And so I sat down with another memory. And that's what I wrote about, wrote it as fiction, but in the first person, in the voice of a 13-year-old girl. And it was about the death of her 15-year-old sister. My own sister had died young. And I had been carrying that story around inside my head, my memory, my heart for all those years. And I wrote it as a book for young people. Houghton Mifflin, which was the publisher who had requested it, published it. And it won a very big award. And I suddenly thought, this is what I should be doing. Forget these stories of marriages and adult themes. And what solidified that was the response from kids, because I got passionate letters from young readers, girls. It was what kids think of as a girl book. It was about two girls, and it was about the death of one. But I began to have a renewed awareness. I would have known this myself as a child, but a renewed awareness of what a book can mean to a child, to a young person, the passion that they brought to their responses. And so that's when I took up writing for young people, which I've been doing ever since.
Lois, that's the whole thing that I get, but because just like we all know that what makes great young adult fiction is great fiction, is that you're writing to the human being. They may not have the experience that we have, but they're fully developed beings, and that you write along the themes that carry. I mean, me at 76, as I'm reading The Giver for the first time, as I'm doing, and I'm sitting there, I'm putting myself in there. I'm running, and we're going to get to this in a little bit about the movie, but I'm running the movie in my mind. That's the way I read. I read in a very visual
Yeah, I do.
sense. And so I'm running that in my mind, and I'm seeing his own questioning as he's learning, going into the 12s and being able to do that. So anyway, so how did this world that you were thinking about in The Giver begin to coalesce
Okay.
to get down into a story? How does that?
Even though you and I have not rehearsed this conversation, it is for me falling into place neatly, because much later, but now I've described to you that first book about the death of my sister, but now years pass and I write a number of other books, some of which I'm still very fond of. And then came a time when my father and mother were both in a nursing home in Virginia. I lived in Boston at the time, and I would fly down there maybe once every 2 months to visit them both. Mother was in the nursing care part. She was blind and on oxygen. Her mind was totally intact, and we would sit there and she would reminisce. I sometimes took a tape recorder, and I'm one of the few people who actually did ask my mother before she died all those questions. Any rate, and then when she tired, and she often talked about my sister, of course. When she got tired, I would go to the other section of the same nursing facility where my father was in assisted living. He was up shuffling around, and could, manage most of his life, but he was experiencing some memory lapses. So my brother and I had prepared a photograph album full of old photographs that would bring back memories for Dad. Dad was a car guy. There was a Chrysler he loved in 1954. And, oh, I love that car, he would say. There was a dog that he hated. There was our house in Japan, our house in Honolulu. At any rate, turning the pages, there is a picture now of two little blonde girls smiling at the camera. And my father says, "Oh, there you are with your sister." And then he says, looking a little abashed, "I can't remember her name." And I said, "Her name was Helen, Dad. She was named for her grandmother." Moment passed. And then he said, "Whatever happened to her?" And I had to say, "She died, Dad." And because it took him by surprise and saddened him so, I turned the page, and there was another house, another car, another dog. And he immediately forgot that moment of sadness. Okay, continue turning the pages. Suddenly there are the two girls again. Now they're teenagers, smiling at the camera. And he says, "Oh, there you are with Helen." And then he said, "I can't remember what happened to her." And I had to say again, "She died, Dad." When I was driving back to the airport to fly home, in my rental car, I thought, and this is what writers often think that triggers an idea. I thought, what if, what if there were a way we could manipulate the human brain so that it didn't have to remember anything sad or scary, bad moments in the past? What if we could just obliterate those, zap them away somehow? It was at a time when it was time to write a new book. I'd written many by then. And there was always a period of time when a new one is about to be published, but I haven't yet started the next one. And I think, oh, I'll never have another idea. I'll be poor, destitute. I'll never, all of that.
The writer's lament that happens. Every actor, every writer, we have. This is the normal part of our process.
Yes, poor me. Anyway, on the plane, I started thinking about, here, down the line, in the future, we don't know how far in the future, a group of people, I ended up calling it the community, who had found a way to do that. I didn't have to go into the science of it. Who knows how they had done it, but they had gotten rid collectively of anything in the past that was troubling. In addition to that, I realized only afterward, in creating that community and describing it, I was drawing on a lot of the army posts I lived on, the housing. Everybody lives in it, except the high-ranking officers, as my father was in his later years. We had the big houses, and the local ones, and there were rules, and we adhered to those rules, and the rules made us feel very safe and organized, but at the same time, there was something creepy about it. I can remember one army post we lived on. Guys came to mow our lawn and trim our bushes, and they were guarded by soldiers with guns because they were out of the military prison.
They were in the brig. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So all of that came together to create that particular book, which became and has remained the most popular of my books. And even though it was published in whatever year, say 1993, perhaps, which again, I can't do the math quickly. It was a long time ago. I still every day get emails, used to be letters, now it's emails about that book. It's in 26 languages, I think. I get letters in languages I can't even identify, much less translate.
It is, and it's extraordinary because when I look at this and when I read it, it is as contemporary today because the way you wrote it, there aren't any. It would fit with taking out because you would understand that they would never allow social media.
Yeah.
This would not be something that because you would then begin to be getting into areas that you couldn't that you wouldn't want to get into.
Yeah.
And Joshua and so Joshua and Fiona and Asher.
His name wrong, Jonas.
I thank you. It's so funny. I said that to myself when I was preparing for this. I said, I'm going to forget Asher's name. I'm going to forget Asher's name. So I kept going, and then I do it with Jonas. So thank you so much. All right, so you get this, and how? So our director Renee met the giver through the movie. So she goes to the movie first, and then goes back into that. I go the opposite direction. Yeah. So I read the book first, and I've run it in it, and then I see the movie, and I, as often happens, I have a difficult time when I see the movie because I've already created the movie in my head, and so I have to deal with not just the characters, but how they had to go into a 2-hour, and into a constructive format. So, how did you deal with that? And were you asked at all to contribute in the process of when the movie began? I'm sure that's a whole story in itself.
It's an interesting question. There have been other movies of some of my books, and there's one under option right now. And by and large, they never consult the author. You
Right.
turn away.
Exactly. That's
And
a common.
I came to terms with that. I thought, okay, the movie is a different thing. The book still exists, and okay. But then when The Giver was, for lack of a better word, I started to say purchased, but optioned by Jeff
Mhm.
Bridges,
Yeah.
who wanted to make a movie that his father was still alive, Lloyd Bridges. I don't know if you remember Lloyd
Are
Bridges.
you kidding? Sea Hunt? I was like this fan. That's where I interact with him and Bo and all. I'm a big fan.
Okay. Well, Lloyd was still alive, and Jeff wanted to direct the film. I think he had never directed a film and wanted to star his father in it. And then I don't remember details. This goes way back. They couldn't raise the money, and it
Mhm.
kind of fell apart for a number of years.
Normal Hollywood part that
Yeah,
happens.
yeah. And then all of a sudden, it came back together because Harvey Weinstein's company put up the
Yep.
money. But now Lloyd Bridges has died. But Jeff Bridges is old enough to play the role. So I had gotten to know Jeff Bridges slightly earlier. And now he reappears, and the movie is going to be made. And they find a director, Philip Noyce. And to my astonishment, they did involve me to a certain extent. And in fact, they very kindly gave me a plane ticket to go to, they filmed it in South Africa. So I went to South Africa and watched them film for a week, which was a lot of fun. I confessed to them that my real interest in filmmaking is in editing. And so it was edited back in New York, and they let me go down to New York and sit in the editing studio for a while. And I did contribute one very important thing to the editing process. But back to the movie itself. Before the filming began, they showed me the screen tests, but it was all a matter of, we will share this with you. Here it is. It's not, do you approve? I mean, it was more, this is what we've decided. We're going to cast this person and this person. Okay. One thing they told me was that they had decided to make the age of the kids in the movie older. In the book, of course, the kids are all just turning 12. I love the age 12 to write about because it can go in so many different directions. But
A great age. That was what touched me so much is that time is because it was 12, and I know that that first
yeah,
time when the flood of hormones hit,
yeah,
and of course we're not taking the
yeah. Anyway, that they explained to me, and I understood this. Two reasons for that. One, if they had 12-year-olds and were using 12-year-old actors, the law required them to limit the number of hours each child could work. It would increase the time it took to make the movie to the extent that it would very much increase the cost of making the movie. But perhaps more importantly, their research had shown that teenagers, at that time, a large part of movie audiences, I don't know if this is still true, teenagers would go to a movie about teenagers, but they wouldn't go to a movie about 12-year-olds. So, okay, they decided that the kids in the movie, the age is unnamed, but they seem to be 17 or 18. And then, of course, here's always the problem with making a movie. With a book, you can be introspective and you can be inside the head of the main character and you can describe his thoughts. You can't do that in a movie. You have to show everything and you have to add action. I could certainly have done without the car chase. Was there an airplane? I mean, just all.
right,
It was
where
pretty.
Asher comes, yeah.
However, that was what they decided for movie reasons, and it was fine. They did seek my advice. They had me come out to Los Angeles before they began filming, and it was at a time when they were still doing costuming and things of that sort. And they showed me, you know, they let me choose certain things, unimportant things.
Sure.
But it was a nice feeling of being somewhat included. Um, so I can't recall what else I was going to tell you about that, but oh,
Well, all right.
I,
So we were gonna. I do want to go. I do want to know about the editing. You got an
oh,
opportunity to go into the editing room.
yeah, there was uh, the final scenes are set in snow, and the movie was filmed in South Africa, where there was a lot of different topography, and there was desert and there was forest,
Sure.
and they do all of that, but there was no snow. So they filmed that in, I believe it was Utah in the wintertime, and they schlepped all the cast over there, including the two South African twins. If they have babies in a movie, they have to hire twins because each baby can only work for 20 minutes at a time. And I was there when they filmed the scene where the father kills an infant.
Yep.
And there was a nurse standing on the side. And at one point, she looks at her watch and she says, "Stop." And they take the one baby away and they bring out the twin baby, and the filming resumes.
Hmm.
So they had to bring the babies and the babies' nursemaids and the babies' parents and everybody to Utah. I didn't go to Utah to watch that, but they found a house and there was snow and they were filming there. And somehow they had shown me the scenes that they filmed. And there is one scene where the boy and the baby have, I haven't seen it in a long time, but they've fallen off the sled. They're
Hmm.
lying in the snow, and the baby is crying. And the baby suddenly stops crying and looks up and is clearly hearing something. Okay. And I thought that was a wonderful moment. Before they find their destination, the baby hears something, is aware of something. So when I'm in the editing room in New York and they're showing me that snow scene, I thought, wait a minute, where is that moment when the baby hears something and looks up? And it was on the cutting room floor. And when I called it to their attention, what a wonderful moment it was. They put it back in. So it is a movie.
Isn't that wonderful? But well, there it goes. All right. Well, there. I I love the fact that this is a gift that just continues to keep on giving, and you continue to get the emails, and you continue to do this. Now, both of us, we are in our fourth quarter of our lives, and we're looking at what do you see of 2024? What excites you? What engages you? What are you curious about, concerned about? What describe you today? Describe your consciousness and what's going through your mind.
Well, I'm 87 years old, and so I'm not going to be around much longer. I regret that. I mean, I've had a terrific life filled with interesting things, but darn, I want to see what's coming next. And of course, you and I are talking right in the midst of the Democratic National Convention,
Yes.
and the politics of the time are so interesting to me. Quite suddenly, more interesting than they were a month ago or 2 months ago. So I'm exhilarated by that, and I'm kind of pissed off that I'm going to miss the interesting things that will lie ahead. And on top of that, the science uh, of the artificial intelligence, which scares us all, and will any writer be able to write a book again because AI can do it better? Who knows? Who knows? But the exciting things that can happen.
Yeah.
Uh, I'd like to be around for all of it. I wish I could go on forever.
I want to ask you about that because I had a thought the other day. All right, let's assume that when photography first came about and became around, it became more accessible. Painters went, oh, I mean, here instead of that, you're taking a photograph. So if we could take the same analogy that the analogy of writers and using the AI as a photographic like photography, using the analogy that there will be, because you know as a photographer what beautiful art that you can make that you wouldn't be painting. But what if there is beautiful art that can be made in this collaboration with this amazing tool?
Yeah, yeah. And so I think we have to look at it that way, as full of possibilities, instead of, oh my God, the end of creativity. It may enhance creativity. You mentioned photography. Uh, when I started out as a photographer, well, I don't know what copy of The Giver you have. Does it have the face of the?
Yeah, it has the black and white. It's the silver edition. It's the one the anniversary edition that has all the addenda in it.
Yeah, it's the same photograph of the man, but on the original cover, it was more clearly a black and white photograph.
Yes.
That's one that I had taken for a magazine article that I'd been assigned to write about a painter, and he was the man that I photographed. I remember writing him after I got home from my time with him that his photograph had been floating in the darkroom sink, and one of my kids had walked past and said, "Who's that Moses you photographed?" And so after that, when we corresponded, he always signed his letters, "Love Moses." But at any rate, that was a photograph I took with an M4 Leica with a handheld meter. I don't know if that means anything to you, but that was somewhat, it was a very sophisticated camera for its time, but its time has long passed. And after that, I went to an SLR and all of that. And then everything became digital, and it wasn't exciting for me anymore. Uh, it was too easy, I guess.
When you look at your grandchildren and look at the life that they are living, do you see their curiosity? Do you because one of the things, like Richard Feynman, one of the gifts that his father gave him, because his father, even though he was the most brilliant physicist and went to MIT and did, Nobel Prize and all, but his father, who was a salesman, gave him the gift of curiosity. To be curious. I wonder why that is. What would you think and wonder what that was? And I just love that. And I can imagine your grandchildren. I would love to be there watching you talk with your grandchildren and to see this
My
experience.
grandchildren are now grown. The youngest just graduated with an engineering degree, and he's 23. Um, but they've been my grandchildren all along. And as you were talking, I'm sitting in what is my summer home. This is an old farmhouse, over 200 years old, and there are rolling meadows and a lot of land around here. And they used to spend a lot of time here with me in the summer. And I remember lying on the front lawn one summer night looking at the sky with two little grandsons who were probably 5 and 7. And the younger one leaned over to me and whispered, "I am very interested in space." And just be still my heart. But that's the same one who's now an engineer. And when I asked him, I mean, he's just working at his first job, and I saw him last weekend, and I said, "What is it you're doing?" And he told me, but I didn't understand any of it. But that was a good thing. I will.
Isn't it a wonderful thing?
My only granddaughter is chairman of the English department in a high school in Germany, and so she's the child of my heart, because had I not become a writer, I probably would have been a teacher. Now I've forgotten what your question was, but
Well, one of the things that I'm asking, because I asked you this before, what are the things when you think about, because you've been interviewed thousands of times, so many, for example, hyperbole, but basically thousands. Are there any things that you have not talked about that might that you've wanted to talk about, or that you have, anything that is on your mind that is something that you'd like to express with us?
Oh gosh, that's an interesting question. And of course, if I'll wake up in the middle of the night tonight.
Oh, absolutely. Exactly. I know. And I'll receive this wonderful email from, well, this is the, yeah, go ahead.
I do remember that when I wrote The Giver, there was mention in it. I can't remember where the mention was, how it was used, but there was mention in it of a same-sex couple, or that there were same-sex couples within the community. And the
Mhm.
editor asked me to take it out, thought it would be a distraction. I think it was a male editor, which is unusual in books for kids.
Sure.
I think he was correct, and he had a good sense of what was appropriate for the audience. So I did, I removed it. But, and I have not, well, yes, I have a new book. New book came out this spring, and there is mention, very brief mention of a same-sex couple. And I've already gotten some objections, one from Texas. That's you guys.
Oh, I know.
So one, I don't want to pander to an, an audience of book banners, but I also don't want books to disappear and not be read because they might have something that
No,
causes
I mean,
problems.
here you have your judge. I mean, your judge, the bachelor judge with the gentleman that comes. We don't know his story. We don't know, but we do know that during all time in human history, there's been a span of our own relationships and how we have. I mean, that's just all part of it. About we One of the things that I love about today is the openness, because I know that when I was growing up, I felt like I was the one broken child, because I looked out and I went, well, I don't know what I'm doing. They don't know what they're doing. I don't know, what's going on. So I love the openness and being able to talk about and being able to say, okay, each of us is an individual, rather than having to conform to
Yeah.
so
And I
much.
think that's one of the things that the book The Giver does convey, the
That's
danger of conformity. I mean, I was talking about my grandchildren earlier. I had four children. I already mentioned that. One of them was killed in the military. So I have three living children, one of whom considers herself non-binary. I'm never exactly sure what that means, but I accept that. And I have four grandchildren, one of whom is gay and came out as a teenager, and we all just accepted it without question. But these are today's times. That could not have happened when I was a child
no.
or when I was a teenager. And it makes me sad in retrospect to think of the people who were hurt by that. Forced into a life that wasn't their true life.
In fitting in what they were, and that's really where I see in the growth that is happening, because in The Giver, each one of those children is assigned a role,
Yeah,
whether it fits them or not. And it's another thing that I think that so shows our today culture.
yeah, yeah.
Huh. So
I'm just,
all right, so what are you writing now? What's on your writing tablet and your writing mind now?
uh, I started to look across the room to my desk to point to my computer until I realized I'm sitting here with my computer in front of me, right in this machine that I'm looking at.
Yes.
I am on page 93 of a manuscript. I don't really like to talk about what I'm working on
No, no,
because
no. I wasn't asking for that. I mean, I know with Elizabeth Gilbert, and she says that, that there are private moments that we need to keep while the magic has. And so I'm not asking you about that. I'm more asking you about the process. Is it a morning process? Is it the getting up? And how is Lois's process?
well, I have on my desk over there a copy of the Virginia Woolf book, A Room. Actually, it was an essay at the time, A Room of One's Own, because that's something that has become very important to me. And I remember when I was typing on my electric Smith Corona back when the kids were young, my kids still talk about this with a certain bemused kind of retrospect, that I had set up a little table with my typewriter on it in a little corner of Dad's office. That Dad's office in the house, but their dad was a lawyer. He had a big desk in the room that we called Dad's office, and I had this pathetic little table and this pathetic typewriter. Uh, but nonetheless, that was my little carved out space. And I have found that I've needed that space of my own. I need that isolation, I guess is the word. So I'm sitting in here, artfully arranged in front of the bookcases, like every talking head you've ever seen. And I realized sitting here and looking at myself that I'm sitting in front of a lot of paperback mysteries. I have pointed out that this is my summer home. That's where the paperback mysteries are. If you go to my winter home, there's a wonderful bookcase filled, alphabetically arranged,
With
uh,
hard,
collected letters and biographies and memoirs, which is my
right.
favorite genre. And I'm so sad there won't be any collected letters anymore because now everything is email.
Yeah.
Any rate, I got diverted there talking about my space, but I do need a space of my own. I'm lucky that this is a big old farmhouse, and I can be here in this room with the door closed. Uh,
Yes.
and that's true wherever I am. That I carve out my space and my
On your
quiet
own.
and my time.
So what's on what currently in August the 22nd? What's on your reading? You're reading for pleasure. You're reading for inspiration. Now, what is and what is?
I don't read children's books or young adult books because I'm a grown up. I like to read about people that I relate to, even
Yes.
though I delve back into my young self in order to write for young people. I'm looking across the room because I see the book I'm currently reading, and I'm trying to remember the full title. I bought 2 copies of it because my partner, Howard, who
Mhm.
is off in his own space in
His
another
own, okay, exactly.
house. I bought 2 copies so that we could read the same book and talk about it. And I chose a Booker Prize winner. So it's by an Australian author named Flanagan. And I believe the title is Passage to the Deep North. I may have that wrong. At any rate, so that's what we're currently doing. I usually have several books going on at the same time. And another one that I'm reading is a memoir, I guess it would be called, an autobiography by a neurosurgeon, because the manuscript that I'm working on requires some knowledge of the interior of the brain. And I have very little knowledge of that. That's terra incognita to me.
Yeah, me too, and because I'm fascinated with consciousness. How
Yes.
did this, how did this coalesce to become me?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's absolutely that sense of this out of all the opportunities, it coalesced to become me is just astonishing.
And what's inside here is a universe. Uh,
An entire universe.
I mentioned earlier about my father in his last months or years. He lived to be 92. Um, and I mentioned also, I think, that he was the son of Norwegian immigrants. He had always told me that his parents spoke Norwegian to each other when he was a little boy, if they didn't want him to understand what they were saying. And
Sure.
they wanted their children to be Americans, and so they did not teach them Norwegian. In his last months in a nursing facility, he suddenly began to speak Norwegian. And of course, nobody could understand him, but it's clear that's what he was doing. And I realized that as his brain began to disappear or disintegrate or whatever happens in there, it had gone down to its earliest memories. And there they were. And so somewhere in there is your own voice at age 4. It's so
Absolutely.
astonishing. Yeah.
Well, I'm so grateful that you spent this time with me, Lois.
Oh,
What
thank
a
you.
gracious person, and what a I love and there is something about consciousness. Now I know that matter and energy are conserved, but in my own theory of everything, I believe somehow consciousness is conserved. I don't know how. I don't know how. I mean, I think that whatever happens may be more complex. Like I think of an ant walking across uh, uh, differential calculus book, and that ant doesn't understand differential calculus. Well, I would think that my ideas to whatever might be is about that same leap. I might not even understand that I couldn't even understand that it's alive because I'm just an ant looking at differential calculus.
That makes me think that you, like me, looks at that sky the way my 5-year-old grandson did and said, I'm interested in space. The more we know, the more telescopes they put out there. I have trouble grasping the concept of light years. But when I mean, the other galaxies, the whole thing out there is just so amazing. And we are such a speck in it, and so unimportant, and yet
And
important.
yet, exactly, yet the opposite too. We
Yeah.
are without it. We are absolutely vital. We are
Yes.
we are irreplaceable.
Yeah.
There is nothing like a you or a me that ever has or was or will be. That's just it, and that makes us precious.
And also, do you ever think about how we're connected to the others? I mean, you can go crazy thinking that, but
Exactly. It is, and because the same instant, even though there are light years that we have, but the same instant happening across the galaxy is happening right now at that instant. That those two instances are happening exactly at the same time. The complete connection. It's a wonderful sense, and so that's where I think that however it is that you and I will transition to whatever it is, there not only will there be some continuity, but it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting in a way that we can't know right now, but it's going to be because your curiosity, your fire, your sense cannot be extinguished. It's eternal. I know that. I know that in the deepest part of
yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah, I know it too, and I'm delighted to hear you say it and confirm it for me.
Thank you, dear. My best to you and to Howard, and to thank him for helping us get the extra time that we had with you. And as soon as I get this done, I'll go ahead and I'll email you a link to both of the conversations that we have. And so it'll probably about a week